It is late as I write this, the kind of late where the world finally stops pretending to be busy. The traffic has disappeared. The neighbors have gone quiet. Even the coffee beside me has grown cold, forgotten sometime between one memory and the next. If these words find a place inside your heart, I hope you'll stay close by subscribing. This little corner of the world is for people who still believe that love is worth waiting for. And if someone quietly came to your mind while listening, only share this message if you feel they were meant to hear it. I don't know your name. I don't know the color of your eyes. I don't know whether you laugh loudly or hide it behind your hand. I don't know if you've already had your heart broken, or if someone is breaking it tonight, but somehow, I have always believed that one day you would hear my voice, maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow, but someday, and before life becomes louder, before routines replace wonder, before we become another couple rushing through grocery stores and forgetting why we smiled at each other in the first place, there are things I need you to know, because may be my last message to you before we finally meet, not because I'm giving up, not because hope has disappeared, but because there comes a moment when every heart has said everything it can while standing alone after that. It simply waits. A few nights ago, I found an old letter tucked inside a book I hadn't opened in years. The paper had yellowed around the edges, the folds had become soft from time. I couldn't remember writing it, yet there it was, my own handwriting staring back at me like it belonged to someone younger. Someone who believed life would unfold exactly as planned. The first sentence made me smile. I hope by now I've met her. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it wasn't. It was painfully innocent. That younger version of me imagined we'd already have countless ordinary mornings together. He thought we'd argue over where to keep the coffee mugs. He imagined you'd steal the blankets. He imagined we'd complain about grocery prices and laugh about absolutely nothing while folding laundry. He dreamed about ordinary things. Funny, isn't it? When we're young, we think happiness will arrive dressed as fireworks. Years later, we realize it usually knocks quietly carrying groceries. That realization didn't come easily. It arrived one disappointment at a time. When people imagine loneliness, they picture empty apartments, silent phones, vacant chairs. But loneliness rarely looks like that. Sometimes loneliness wears a crowded restaurant. It smiles during birthday parties. It laughs at weddings. It answers, "I'm doing great." I learned that slowly. There was one evening that still returns to me more often than I'd like. The rain had started just before sunset, not heavy rain, just enough to make the sidewalks shine. I ducked into a little cafe to wait for it to pass. Inside, an elderly couple sat near the window, nothing unusual, no dramatic conversation, no grand romantic gestures. The man quietly reached across the table and moved her cup a little closer because she always forgot it while reading. She never even looked up. She simply smiled, almost automatically, like someone smiling in a language they'd spoken for 50 years. That tiny movement lasted maybe 2 seconds. No one else noticed, but I couldn't stop watching because suddenly I understood something I hadn't before. Love isn't built from unforgettable moments. It's built from forgettable attention. The world celebrates proposals, anniversaries, vacations, but relationships survive because someone remembers how you take your tea, or notices you're cold before you say a word, or saves the last piece of dessert without mentioning it. Strange, the smallest kindness can reveal the biggest love. I left that cafe with wet shoes, and an ache I couldn't explain. Not because I wanted what they had, because I realized I wanted to become someone capable of giving that kind of love. That changed everything, although I didn't realize it until much later. There is something people rarely admit. We spend years searching for the right person, while quietly avoiding becoming the right person ourselves. I certainly did. I thought finding love was mostly luck. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong city, wrong season. But life has an unusual way of slowing us down until we notice what we kept running past. There were years when I chased accomplishments. More work, more plans, more distractions. Every goal reached was immediately replaced by another, like climbing stairs that never ended. Each achievement echoed for a moment. Then the room became quiet again. One night I walked home after working far too late. The streets were almost empty. Streetlights stretched long shadows across the pavement. A little boy was walking beside his father. They weren't talking. The boy simply reached up and held his father's hand. Nothing dramatic happened. No music, no speeches. Yet I remember that moment more clearly than entire years of my own life, because peace often arrives without announcing itself. It doesn't ask to be photographed. It doesn't trend online. It simply exists, waiting for someone patient enough to notice. That night I wondered, how many beautiful moments had I missed because I was staring too far ahead? Maybe you've wondered that too. Maybe you've spent years believing life begins after the next relationship, the next move, the next miracle. Maybe we've both been standing in tomorrow, while today quietly slipped away unnoticed. There is something I hope you'll forgive me for. I have imagined you, more times than I could ever count, not your face. Faces change. Time is gentle with some people and honest with others. That's never mattered to me. I've imagined the little things instead. Whether you hum while cooking, whether you stop to pet every stray cat, whether you cry during old movies but insist it was just allergies. I've imagined hearing your footsteps coming home after a long day. I've imagined saying, "You're finally here." Not because you were late, because I'd been waiting much longer than either of us realized. Sometimes I wonder, have you imagined me too? Perhaps you've looked across crowded rooms feeling as though someone was chatting. Perhaps you've saved conversations in your heart meant for someone who hadn't arrived yet. Perhaps tonight, without knowing why, you feel less alone than you did yesterday. If that's true, maybe invisible threads are already pulling our stories toward each other. Not magic, not fate in the fairy tale sense, just thousands of tiny choices. A delayed train, a different job, a canceled trip, a conversation almost skipped. Life doesn't usually change through one giant event. It changes because of ordinary moments we barely notice while living them. Only later do they glow. The letter I found ended with one sentence. It wasn't poetic, it wasn't wise, it simply said, "I hope she's worth the wait." For a long time, I thought that sentence was about you. Tonight, I think it was really about me because waiting has a quiet way of transforming people. It sands away impatience. It teaches tenderness. It humbles certainty. It reminds us that love isn't something we conquer. It's something we become ready to receive, and yet, there's one memory I have never told anyone, a memory involving an empty train station, a forgotten photograph, and a stranger whose words stayed with me for years. At the time, it seemed completely insignificant. Now, I believe it may have changed the direction of my life without me realizing it. There are places that seem to exist outside of time, not because they are beautiful, not because they are famous, but because a single moment happened there that quietly divided your life into before and after. For me, it was an old train station, not the kind you see in movies. There were no dramatic goodbyes, no orchestra playing back, just a tired platform, the rain on concrete, and a coffee cup slowly losing its warmth in my hands. I wasn't traveling anywhere important. In fact, I almost didn't go at all. I had missed my first train after spending too long helping an elderly man lift his suitcase onto the platform. I remember feeling annoyed. I checked the departure board every few minutes. I sighed, I looked at my phone, then I looked around. Funny how life works. The moments we complain about often become the moments we treasure most. Across the platform sat an old woman. She wasn't reading. She wasn't scrolling through a phone. She simply watched people. Young couples, families, business travelers, children chasing pigeons. Her eyes followed each one with the quiet patience of someone who had learned that every stranger carries a story invisible to everyone else. After a while, she smiled at me, not the polite smile people exchange out of habit, a real one, the kind that reaches the eyes before it reaches the mouth. "You look like you're waiting for more than a train," she said. I laughed mostly because I didn't know how to answer. How do you explain a feeling you've carried for years? How do you describe missing someone you've never met? So instead, I shrugged. She nodded as if my silence had answered perfectly. "Most people think waiting is empty," she said. "It isn't, it's where life quietly prepares us." Then the announcement came. Another delay. People groaned. Someone complained loudly. The old woman simply looked toward the tracks as though she'd expected it all along. I still think about those words, because at the time, I thought waiting was punishment. Years later, I realized it had been protection. There are people we would have loved too early, conversations we weren't mature enough to have, promises we couldn't have kept. Sometimes the greatest gift life gives us is not yet. While waiting, I wandered toward the far end of the platform. There wasn't much there, an old wooden bench, a rusted clock that seemed permanently 5 minutes slow, and beneath that bench it was face down. Rain had curled the corners. I picked it up carefully. The picture showed two young people laughing beside the ocean. Nothing extraordinary, no famous landmark, no expensive vacation, just sunlight, wind, and happiness that looked completely unaware it was being photographed. Someone had written on the back, "No matter where life takes us, remember this day." No names, no date, nothing else. I stared at that sentence much longer than I expected, because suddenly, I wasn't wondering who they were. I was wondering where they had gone. Were they still together? Did they build the ordinary life they'd dreamed about? Did one of them leave? Did life separate them quietly, the way tides slowly erase footprints from the sand? Or perhaps, they were sitting together somewhere that very evening, older now, lawing about how young they looked in that picture. We'll never know. That's the strange thing about strangers. We only ever see one page of their story, yet our hearts somehow invent the rest. Maybe that's why photographs feel so powerful. They don't preserve life, they preserve questions. I slipped the photograph into my notebook, not because it belonged to me, because it reminded me of something I didn't want to forget. Every love story, no matter how beautiful, is eventually carried by memory. One day, even our happiest moments become stories we tell. That's why ordinary days matter so much. They're becoming tomorrow's nostalgia while we're busy living them. I wish someone had told me that earlier. I spent years believing memories were created during vacations, birthdays, celebrations, but the memories that return most often are strangely simple. A rainy walk, burned toast, Age. A sleepy smile across the breakfast table. Someone saying, drive safely. Those tiny moments don't ask for attention, yet somehow they become the ones we miss most. The train finally arrived. People rushed toward the doors as though 5 extra minutes had changed everything. The old woman stood slowly. Before boarding, she looked back at me one last time. Don't spend your life looking for certainty, she said. Look for kindness. Then she disappeared into the crowd. I never saw her again. Sometimes I wonder if she was real. Memory has a peculiar habit of polishing certain people until they feel almost mythical. But whether every detail happened exactly as I remember no longer matters. The lessons stayed. That's what makes someone unforgettable. Not the length of time they stay, the depth of what they leave behind. Years passed. Life became busier. Jobs changed. Friends moved away. Phones were upgraded, postcards forgotten. Entire seasons disappeared before I noticed them, yet every now and then, I'd open the notebook. The photograph was still there, its edges softer now. Its colors fading, almost as though time itself had been touching it. Each time I looked at it, I imagined different endings. Sometimes the couple grew old together. Sometimes they reunited after decades apart. Sometimes one waited while the other never came home. Every version felt possible. Because love has never followed a predictable script. It surprises us. It wounds us. It heals us in ways logic cannot explain. Psychologists often say our minds remember unfinished stories better than completed ones. Maybe that's why old relationships linger. Not because they were perfect. Because they left sentences unfinished. Questions unanswered. Doors quietly left open. Our hearts aren't haunted by endings. They're haunted by maybes. Maybe if I'd spoken sooner. Maybe if I'd stayed. Maybe if timing had been kinder. Maybe. It's such a small word, yet it can echo through decades. I promised myself something after realizing that, if I ever met you, I would never leave important words unsaid. I'd tell you when I appreciated you. I'd apologize before pride became a wall. I'd remind you, even on ordinary Tuesdays, that I was grateful you existed, because silence collects interest. The longer we leave love unspoken, the heavier it becomes. That old photograph still sits inside the notebook beside the letter I wrote years ago. 2 forgotten objects, one from someone I never knew, one from someone I used to be. Sometimes I place them side by side. The photograph asks one question, the letter asks another, and somewhere between them, I think I finally found the answer. Love isn't measured by how spectacular its beginning is. It's measured by what remains after the excitement fades. When there are no fireworks, no grand speeches, no audience, just 2 people, choosing each other again and again and again. But there was another lesson waiting for me, one I resisted for years. It began on a quiet autumn afternoon, with an empty chair by a window, a phone that never rang, and a silence that finally forced me to confront the one person I had been avoiding my entire life, myself. Autumn has a way of telling the truth, not loudly, not all at once. Just one falling leaf at a time. The trees never argue with the season. They don't cling to what they cannot keep. They simply let go. I used to think that was sadness. Now I think it might be wisdom. It happened on an ordinary Thursday. Nothing remarkable about the date. No holiday, no celebration. Just another afternoon that looked exactly like the hundreds before it. Rain tapped gently against the window. The kettle whistled in the kitchen. A chair across from me sat empty as it always had. I poured 2 cups of coffee without thinking, one for me, one for someone who wasn't there. I smiled at my own habit, then quietly poured the second cup back into the pot. It sounds strange now. But loneliness doesn't always announce itself with tears. Sometimes it hides inside little routines you've never questioned. The second cup, the extra pillow, the instinct to turn and tell someone about something funny you just read, only to remember, there's no one in the room. Those moments don't break your heart all at once. They wear it smooth. For years I blamed timing. I blamed distance. I blamed work. I blamed bad luck. It's easier to point at the weather than to notice the cracks in your own roof. Then one afternoon, while cleaning a closet I had ignored for far too long, I found an old mirror leaning behind a stack of forgotten boxes. Its frame was chipped, dust softened the glass. When I wiped it clean, my own reflection looked unfamiliar, not because I had changed, because I hadn't really looked at myself in a long time, not the face, the person. I asked myself a question that made the room feel strangely quiet. If she walked through the door today, would I be ready to love her the way she deserves? The answer didn't come immediately. It rarely does when it's honest. We spend so much of life preparing for careers, saving money, learning skills, planning vacations, yet almost no one teaches us how to prepare our hearts, how to listen instead of waiting to speak, how to apologize without defending ourselves, how to sit beside another person's pain without trying to fix it. Those lessons usually arrive disguised as heartbreak or regret or cynicism. Mine arrived through all 3. There was a season when I thought being strong meant carrying everything alone. I never wanted to inconvenience anyone. If something hurt, I buried it. If I was disappointed, I smiled anyway. If I missed someone, I convinced myself it would pass. People even complimented me. You're so calm. Nothing seems to bother you. What they didn't know was that silence can become a prison with beautifully decorated walls. You stop sharing little worries, then bigger ones. Eventually, even joy begins to stay inside, because you've forgotten how to let anything out. Maybe you've met someone like that, or maybe you're quietly becoming that person yourself. One evening I visited my parents. Nothing special had been planned. My mother made soup. My father was trying to fix an old radio that probably should have been replaced years ago. He tapped it, dial, tapped it again, static, more static, then for just a second, music. Only a few notes before the signal disappeared again. He smiled anyway. Sometimes, he said without looking up, it's still in there. You just have to keep adjusting until you find the right frequency. He was talking about the radio, at least I think he was, but those words followed me home. How many relationships fail because two good people simply stop adjusting? Not changing who they are, just learning how the other person hears love. Some people hear it through words, some through quiet acts of service, some through shared time, some through gentle touch, some through simply knowing someone remembered. We often say, they don't love me enough, when sometimes the truth is, they've been speaking love in a language we never learned to hear. That realization softened something inside me, not all at once, just enough to make room for grace. The old photograph from the train station still rested inside my notebook. The letter from my younger self was tucked behind it. Now there was something new, a small receipt from that evening at my parents' house. It wasn't valuable, it wasn't beautiful. But when I looked at it later, I remembered the smell of soup, the sound of rain outside, the crackle of that stubborn old radio. Mare is curious. It attaches itself to ordinary objects, a receipt, a key, a faded ticket, a coffee stain on a page. Years later they become doors. Open one page, and suddenly you're standing inside another version of your life. Maybe that's why it's so hard to throw certain things away. We're not keeping paper, we're protecting moments. Not long after that, I walked through a neighborhood park just before sunset. Children were racing each other along a path lined with maple trees. An older man sat alone on a bench, feeding birds. As I passed, one small sparrow landed beside him. He didn't move, didn't reach for it, didn't try to make the moment last. He simply smiled. When the bird flew away a few seconds later, he whispered something I almost missed. Thank you. Not come back, not don't leave. Just thank you. I kept walking, but those two words stayed with me. Gratitude asks less of life than possession does. Perhaps that's why grateful hearts heal faster. They appreciate what was given instead of only mourning what was lost. I wondered, could I love someone that way? Not by trying to own every moment, but by honoring each one while it lasted. It sounded simple, it wasn't, because fear has a habit of disguising itself as love. We hold tighter. We worry more. We ask for constant reassurance, not because love is weak, because we're afraid of losing it. Real love doesn't eliminate fear. It teaches us to choose trust anyway. That night I returned home and opened the notebook again, the photograph, the letter, the receipt. 3 ordinary things, 3 reminders that life is always speaking, even when we think nothing important is happening. Then I noticed something tucked between the pages that I had somehow overlooked before, a tiny pressed maple leaf, dry, fragile, almost weightless. I couldn't remember when I had placed it there, but seeing it made me realize something unexpected. Everything I had been saving wasn't really about the past. It was about hope that one day I would sit beside you and spread these little treasures across a table. I'd hand you the faded photograph, tell you about the train station, shows you the letter written by a younger version of me, law about the second cup of coffee I used to pour without thinking, and maybe, you'd reach into your own bag, you'd place your own collection beside mine, a movie ticket, a shell from a beach, an old birthday card, a key to a place you've long since left, because before two people share a future, they quietly carry entire museums of memories. We don't fall in love with empty pages, we fall in love with stories already in progress. But there was one story I had avoided opening for years. Not because it was painful, because it revealed the greatest mistake I had ever made. It happened on a winter evening, under a sky full of snow, when I let someone walk away without saying the one sentence they deserved to hear. For years, I believed I had lost a person. Only much later did I understand what I had really lost. Winter changes the sound of the world. Footsteps become softer. The wind seems to carry voices a little farther. Even silence feels heavier, as if the cold has given it weight. Whenever the first snowfall arrives, I remember that evening. Not because something extraordinary happened, because something ordinary didn't. A sentence remained inside my heart, and once a sentence stays there long enough, it slowly becomes a lifetime of wondering. It was years ago. The city had already disappeared beneath fresh snow. Streetlights painted long golden reflections across the sidewalks. People hurried home with their collars turned up against the cold. I had just left work, tired, distracted, already thinking about tomorrow before today had even finished. My phone vibrated. A friend asked if I could meet for coffee. I almost said no, there was work waiting. Eames laundry, the usual excuses that feel important until enough years pass. Instead I went. The cafe was nearly empty. Steam drifted from cups resting beside fogged windows. Soft music played somewhere overhead. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that suggested I would remember this night forever. My friend smiled when I arrived. But something behind that smile didn't reach the eyes. You know the kind, the smile people wear because they don't want anyone asking difficult questions. We talked about ordinary things: work, traffic, movies, age, weather, everything except the reason either of us really needed to be there. Sometimes two people sit across from each other, both hoping the other will ask, "Are you really okay?" Neither does. And the moment quietly passes. When we stood to leave, snow was falling harder. We hugged, a quick, ordinary goodbye. Then my friend looked back and said, "Take care of yourself." I answered automatically, "You too." We walked in opposite directions. I remember taking maybe 20 steps before something inside me whispered, "Go back." I stopped, turned halfway. They were still there. Just across the street. I could have called out, I could have crossed the road, I could have said, "You don't have to carry everything alone." Or, "Whatever you're facing, I'm here." Or even, "I love you, my friend." 3 seconds, maybe 5, that's all it would have taken. Instead, the traffic light changed. People crossed between. Told myself, I'll say it next time. Life has broken more hearts with next time than with goodbye. A few weeks later, they moved away, not forever, just far enough that life became phone calls instead of coffee. Then messages instead of phone calls, then birthdays, then silence. Nothing terrible happened, no argument, no betrayal, just the quiet drift that steals so many good people from each other's lives. And every winter, I still hear those words, "Take care of yourself." Not because they were profound, because I answered them without truly listening. Psychologists often say that regret is different from grief. Grief mourns what happened. Regret mourns what could have happened. That's why regret lingers. It keeps rewriting the ending. If only. What if, maybe. Those tiny phrases become rooms we visit, long after everyone else has gone home. For years, I kept replaying that snowy evening, not because I believed one conversation would have changed everything, because I finally understood something simple. People rarely remember our perfect words. They remember whether they felt seen, whether someone noticed, whether someone stayed 5 minutes longer than they had to. That realization changed the way I moved through the world. I started calling my parents for no reason, not because there was news, just because hearing familiar voices suddenly felt like a gift instead of a routine. I lingered after dinners with friends. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes while someone was telling me a story. I learned that attention is one of the purest forms of love. When someone says, "Tell me again," they're really saying, "You matter enough for me to give you this moment." We spend money to show affection. We buy flowers, gifts, jewelry, vacations, all beautiful things. But the rarest gift has always been the one no one can buy: undivided presence. One Saturday morning, I visited a small bookstore tucked between two old brick buildings. It smelled like paper and cedar wood. The owner was an elderly man with silver hair and glasses that kept sliding down his nose. While he wrapped my purchase, I noticed a faded envelope framed behind the counter. Its edges had turned almost golden with age. I asked him about it. He smiled in that distant way people do when memory gently interrupts the present. "My wife wrote me that letter before we married," he said. "Have you read it recently?" I asked. He shook his head. "Why not?" "Because I already know every word." He paused, then added quietly, "But I like knowing it's still here." That answer stayed with me. Love isn't always about opening the letter. Sometimes it's about knowing it exists. Knowing someone once chose you. Knowing somewhere in this world your story has a home. I wondered if one day we'd have our own little treasures: a grocery receipt from our first apartment, a photograph where one of us blinked, a recipe stained with coffee. Nothing anyone else would consider valuable, everything we would. I imagine us years from now, older, slower. Perhaps sitting on a porch while evening settles across the sky. The conversation has grown comfortable enough to welcome silence. You'd ask, "Do you remember that rainy train station story?" I'd smile before answering, not because I'd forgotten, because I never could. Then you'd remind me of something I had forgotten. The way I looked at you the first time we laughed together. The song playing in the car during our longest drive. The ridiculous argument over where the plants should go. That's another quiet truth about love. We become each other's memory. When one person forgets, the other remembers. Together they keep the story alive. But before any of that could happen, I had to face a harder question: not whether I was capable of loving someone, whether I was capable of forgiving myself, because hidden beneath every regret I carried, beneath the snowy street, the empty chair, the second cup of coffee, the forgotten photograph, was one belief I had never challenged, a belief that whispered, "Maybe you waited this long because you weren't worthy of being found." For years, I believed it without realizing it. And that silent belief shaped every decision I made. I didn't know it then, but one unexpected conversation with a little girl in a park would completely unravel that lie. And once it did, I would never see love or myself the same way again. Some of life's greatest teachers never realize they're teaching. They don't stand behind podiums. They don't write best-selling books. They don't even know they're answering the questions we've carried for years. Sometimes, they're just a child chasing bubbles through a park. Spring had finally arrived, after months of gray skies and cold mornings. The city seemed to breathe again. Trees that had looked lifeless only weeks before were quietly dressed in green. Birds returned to branches that had waited patiently all winter. People smiled at strangers a little more often. It always amazes me how sunlight can change not only a landscape, but a heart. That afternoon I wandered into a small park with no destination in mind. I carried my notebook as usual. Inside were the familiar companions I'd been collecting through the years, the faded photograph from the train station, the letter written by my younger self, the coffee receipt from my parents' house, the pressed maple leaf, 4 ordinary objects, 4 reminders that life hides extraordinary meaning inside ordinary days. I found an empty bench beneath an old oak tree and sat down. Children laughed somewhere nearby. A dog chased a tennis ball with complete confidence that happiness could always be caught. For a while, I simply watched. No phone, no music, just the quiet rhythm of people living their lives. I used to think moments like this were unproductive. Now I know they are, where the soul catches up with the body. A little girl wandered over carrying a handful of dandelions, not a bouquet, just a messy collection of flowers held together by tiny fingers. She stopped in front of me, looked directly into my eyes, then held one flower toward me. For you. No hesitation. No reason, just kindness. I accepted it with a smile. She nodded proudly, then sat on the opposite end of the bench without asking. Children have a remarkable ability to treat strangers as though the world is still safe. Somewhere along the way, most of us lose that gift. She looked at the notebook resting beside me. What's inside? I laughed softly. Old memories. You to feel safe enough to tell me the truth before the truth becomes resentment. If you're hurt, tell me. If you're confused, ask me. If you're happy, tell me. If something I do makes you feel loved, tell me that too. I want to know. Not because I need constant reassurance. Because I want to understand what reaches your heart, and I want you to know the same about me. There are things I may not say perfectly. There may be moments when I don't know how to explain what I'm feeling, but I hope you'll never confuse imperfect communication with a lack of care. Sometimes a person can love deeply and still struggle to find the right words. That's when patience matters. That's when 2 people have to remember that they're on the same side. Not you against me, not me against you. Use against the misunderstandings, against the distance. Us against the fear that tells us to shut down instead of reaching toward each other. And perhaps that is what I really want my number to mean. Not simply, call me, but, you don't have to face everything alone when I'm here. And there will come a time when those words will have to become more than something I say. They will have to become something I prove. Because anyone can make promises before love becomes difficult. The real question is what remains when life becomes inconvenient, exhausting, confusing, and imperfect. That's where I want us to discover what we really have. Not in perfection, in consistency, not in grand promises, in ordinary days. And I think that's where the next thing I need to tell you begins, because if you're going to have my number someday, I don't just want you to know that you can reach me. I want you to know what kind of man you're reaching. And that is something I think about more seriously than I probably know how to explain. Because giving someone access to you is easy, becoming someone they can actually depend on is much harder. Anyone can say, I'm here. The difficult part is becoming the kind of person whose presence makes those words believable. That's what I want to become for you. Not someone who is perfect, not someone who always knows exactly what to say. Just someone whose actions don't constantly contradict his promises. If I tell you that you matter to me, I want the way I treat you to make that obvious. If I tell you that your feelings are important, I want you to see that in the way I listen. If I tell you that I love you, I don't want those words to become so common that they lose their meaning. I want them to remain connected to something real, because words can be beautiful. But eventually, every beautiful word has to meet ordinary life. And ordinary life is where love is tested. It's in the mornings when neither person slept well. It's in the evenings when one of us is mentally exhausted. It's in the small misunderstandings that seem insignificant until nobody talks about them. It's in the moments when one person wants to talk and the other needs a little time. It's in the difference between hearing someone and actually listening. Those moments may never look romantic, but I think they tell us more about love than the most beautiful declaration ever could. I don't want to love you only when loving you feels easy. I want to learn how to love you when I have to choose patience, and I hope you want to learn the same thing about me. Because I don't expect you to always understand me immediately. There may be parts of me that take time. There may be things I learned long before you knew my name. Some habits may take patience, some fears may take honesty, some weaknesses may take courage to admit. And I want you to have that same freedom. You shouldn't have to hide every imperfect part of yourself just to remain lovable. I don't want to fall in love with an image of you. I want to know you, the real you. The woman who has good days and difficult ones. The woman who sometimes feels confident and sometimes questions herself. The woman who can be strong for everyone else and still needs someone to tell her, you don't have to be strong right now. I want to be capable of saying that, and I want you to be able to say it to me. Because strength doesn't mean never needing anyone. Sometimes strength is admitting that you do. There is no shame in that. I think one of the quietest forms of intimacy is being able to lower your guard around someone, not because you have stopped caring about how they see you, but because you trust them enough not to perform. You don't have to be impressive. You don't have to have the perfect answer. You don't have to pretend your day was wonderful when it wasn't. You can simply say, "Today was difficult." And the other person doesn't immediately try to fix everything. They listen. Sometimes that's all love needs to do. Listen, stay, understand. And maybe that's why I don't want our relationship to be built entirely around excitement. Excitement comes and goes. Life changes. There will be busy seasons. There will be quiet seasons. There will be days when romance feels effortless and days when we're simply trying to get through the week. But if underneath all of that there is friendship, real friendship, then I think we have something strong. I want to be the person you can laugh with about something completely ridiculous. The person you can sit beside without needing to fill every silence. The person you can tell the smallest details of your day to. Not because every detail is important to the world, because it's important to you. And if it matters to you, I want to make room for it. Maybe that's what people mean when they say they want to be known, not admired. Known, there is a difference. Being admired can happen from a distance. Being known requires closeness. It means someone has seen the parts you don't show everyone, and instead of using them against you, they hold them carefully. That's the kind of trust I want. I don't want to collect your weaknesses. I want to understand them. I don't want to know what hurts you so I can win an argument later. I want to know so I can be more careful with your heart. And I hope you'll treat mine with that same care. Because there are some things people say during arguments that cannot simply be erased when the argument ends. A sentence can take 2 seconds to say and years to forget. I don't want us to become people who use vulnerability as ammunition. If you tell me something because you trust me, I want that information to remain safe with me, even when we're angry, especially when we're angry. Because love should not become a place where two people feel punished for being honest. If we're going to have difficult conversations, I want them to be difficult because the truth is difficult, not because we're trying to hurt each other. And I know there will be moments when one of us gets defensive. We're human. There will be moments when pride speaks faster than wisdom. But I hope we learn to recognize those moments. I hope one of us can eventually say, "Wait, that's not what I meant." Or, "I'm getting angry, but I don't want to hurt you." Or simply, "Can we try this conversation again?" That kind of sentence may not sound romantic, but to me it is, because it means the relationship matters more than winning. And if you ever call me, I want you to know that. You don't have to call because everything is falling apart. Call because you want to tell me something funny. Call because you remembered something. Call because you heard a song that made you think of me. Call because you're excited. Call because you're tired. Call because you don't have anything important to say. You don't need a reason. Sometimes hearing the voice of someone you love is reason enough. And perhaps that is what I have been trying to say from the beginning. I don't want my number to be something you hesitate to use. I want it to feel familiar, ordinary, like something that belongs naturally in your life, because the strongest relationships often become part of ordinary life. Not because they become less special, because they become deeply woven into it. Your good morning, your good night, the little updates, the questions, the laughter, the occasional silence, the reassurance, the difficult conversations, the forgiveness, the "I got home," the "Did you eat?" the "How was your day?" Tiny sentences, but sometimes an entire relationship can live inside them. And maybe one day, you'll send me a message that simply says, "Are you awake?" And I hope you already know the answer. Not because I'll always be awake, but because you'll know that even when I can't answer immediately, there is no question about whether I want to hear from you. That certainty matters. And I think I know why. Because when someone has spent enough time wondering whether they matter, eventually they stop asking for grand promises. They just want consistency. They want to know that affection won't disappear without warning. They want to know that closeness won't suddenly become distance. They want to know that one difficult day doesn't erase everything that came before it. I want to give you that kind of stability. Not perfection, stability. And I want to receive it from you too, because I don't want to spend our years trying to convince each other that we're worth staying for. I want us to know, quietly, without needing to prove it every morning, without needing to test it every night, just knowing. And there is something almost frightening about wanting that, because once you care deeply about someone, you also become aware of what you could lose. That's the part people don't always talk about. Love gives you something beautiful. And at the same time it gives your heart something it can be afraid of losing. And maybe that's the next thing I need to be honest with you about. Because if you ever become the person on the other end of my number, AB won't just be giving you access to my phone. I'll be giving you access to parts of me that I don't show everyone. And maybe that is the part I have been afraid to say out loud, because giving someone your number is easy. Giving someone your trust is different. Giving someone the ability to affect your happiness is different. And eventually, if you become my wife, I know there will be days when your words affect me more than anyone else's. A simple, "I'm proud of you" might mean more than you realize. A quiet "I'm here" might reach me on a day when I don't have much left to give. And even something as ordinary as seeing your name on my phone could become one of those small things that makes life feel a little less heavy. That's why I don't want to treat love casually. Not because love has to be serious every second, but because the person you allow close enough to know you can eventually touch parts of you that the rest of the world never reaches. And I want to be careful with that. I want to be careful with you. I want you to know that if you ever trust me with something fragile, I won't treat it like a weakness. If you tell me about something that scares you, I won't make you regret telling me. If you admit that you're struggling, I won't make you feel like you're failing. And if there are days when you simply need someone beside you without solutions, I hope I can understand that too. Because sometimes love isn't about finding the perfect words, sometimes it's just about staying. There may be moments when I don't know what to say. There may be moments when you don't know what to say. That's okay, we don't have to turn every emotion into a perfect sentence. Sometimes we can simply be honest.